The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the narrow alleyways of the abandoned district into rivers of mud and despair. Maya pressed herself deeper into the cardboard shelter she had constructed behind the old bakery, her stomach cramping with a hunger so fierce it felt like claws tearing at her insides. The cardboard was soggy now, offering little protection from the cold that seeped through her threadbare clothes and into her very bones. She was only 19, but life had aged her beyond her years. Her dark hair hung in matted strands around her gaunt face, and her once bright eyes had dulled to the color of storm clouds. It had been 4 days since her last real meal, and even longer since she had felt anything resembling hope. The streets had become her home after her grandmother's death 6 months ago, when the landlord had thrown her out for being unable to pay rent on the tiny apartment they had shared. Maya remembered the day everything changed with painful clarity. She had come home from her job at the corner store to find an eviction notice taped to the door and her few belongings scattered on the sidewalk. Her grandmother, the only family she had ever known, had died just weeks before from an illness they couldn't afford to treat properly. The medical bills had consumed what little money they had saved, leaving Maya with nothing but debt and the clothes on her back. The corner store job had disappeared soon after when the owner discovered she was homeless. "Can't have someone unreliable working here," he had said, as if being without a home somehow made her less trustworthy. Since then, Maya had survived on whatever scraps she could find, occasional odd jobs that paid in cash, and the rare kindness of strangers who dropped coins into the cup she sometimes held with trembling hands. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, the hunger was so intense that she could barely think straight. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she knew she was reaching a dangerous point. She had seen other homeless people deteriorate this way, becoming weaker and weaker until they simply disappeared. Maya refused to let that happen to her, but she was running out of options. The sound of heavy boots splashing through puddles made her freeze. In this part of the city, late-night visitors rarely brought good news. Gang members often roamed these streets, and Maya had learned to make herself invisible whenever she heard approaching footsteps. She pulled the soggy cardboard closer around her, trying to blend into the shadows cast by the overflowing dumpster. But the footsteps stopped right outside her makeshift shelter. Maya held her breath, her heart pounding so loud she was sure whoever was out there could hear it. A deep voice, roughened by years of shouting orders and breathing smoke, cut through the sound of the rain. "I know you're there, girl. Come out where I can see you." Maya's mind raced. She could try to run, but, in her weakened state, she wouldn't make it far. She could stay hidden and hope he would leave, but something in his voice suggested he wasn't going anywhere. Slowly, with movements that betrayed her exhaustion, she pushed aside the cardboard and emerged into the dim light cast by a distant street lamp. The man standing before her was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with arms covered in intricate tattoos that seemed to tell stories of battles fought and won. His face was weathered and scarred, speaking of a life lived on the edge, but his eyes held an unexpected kindness. He wore a leather jacket despite the rain, and Maya could see the glint of metal beneath it, suggesting he was armed. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentler now that he could see her clearly. "Maya," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her obvious hunger and desperation. His expression softened slightly, though his posture remained alert and ready for trouble. "When did you last eat, Maya?" The question hit her like a physical blow, reminding her of just how desperate her situation had become. Tears mixed with rainwater on her cheeks as she struggled to answer. 4 days ago. Maybe 5. I found some bread behind the restaurant on 5th Street, but it was moldy." The man's jaw tightened, and Maya saw something flash in his eyes that might have been anger, though she sensed it wasn't directed at her. He reached into his jacket, and Maya tensed, expecting the worst. Instead, he pulled out a wrapped sandwich and a bottle of water. "Eat this slowly," he said, offering her the food. "Your stomach won't handle it well if you eat too fast." Maya stared at the sandwich as if it might disappear if she blinked. Her hand shook as she reached for it, and she had to fight back tears of gratitude. The bread was fresh, the kind she remembered from better days when she and her grandmother would treat themselves to lunch at the deli downtown. She forced herself to take small bites, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour it. "What's your story?" the man asked as she ate. "How did you end up here?" Between careful bites, Maya told him about her grandmother's death, the medical bills, the eviction, and the job loss. She spoke quietly, without self-pity, simply stating the facts of her descent into homelessness. The man listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. "My name is Marcus," he said when she finished. "And I'm going to make you an offer." Maya looked up from the sandwich, water bottle halfway to her lips. In her experience, offers from strangers on dark streets usually came with strings attached, and those strings were rarely in her favor. "I run a group of people who've been where you are," Marcus continued. "People who've been forgotten by society, written off as lost causes. We take care of our own, and we don't let anyone go hungry or sleep in the rain." "What kind of group?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The tattoos, the confident way he carried himself, the fact that he was walking these streets alone at night, all pointed to one conclusion. "We're called the Iron Wolves," Marcus said, confirming her suspicions. "And, before you get scared and run, let me tell you what that really means. We're not the kind of gang you've probably heard about on the news. We don't deal drugs to kids or hurt innocent people. We're a family, Maya. A family that protects each other and takes care of business when the system fails." Maya had heard stories about gangs that claimed to be different, to be better than the rest. But she had also seen the results of gang violence in her neighborhood, the fear in people's eyes when certain groups passed by. Still, as she sat in the rain with only a soggy piece of cardboard for shelter, she had to admit that her options were limited. "What would you want from me?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness in asking. Marcus smiled for the first time, and Maya was startled to see how it transformed his face. The hardness remained, but underneath it was something warm and almost paternal. "Smart question. Most people in your situation would jump at any offer without thinking it through." He crouched down so they were at eye level, his voice becoming more serious. "The Iron Wolves operate several legitimate businesses. We have a garage where we fix cars and motorcycles, a small restaurant, and a security company. Everyone contributes according to their abilities. Some people are good with numbers, others are good with their hands, and some are good at talking to people." "And if someone isn't good at any of those things?" Maya asked. "Then, we help them find what they are good at," Marcus replied. "Everyone has something to offer, Maya. Everyone has value. The world might have convinced you otherwise, but I've learned to see potential where others see problems." Maya finished the sandwich and felt the first real warmth she had experienced in days spreading through her chest. It wasn't just the food, though, that helped. It was the way Marcus spoke to her, as if she were a person worth investing in rather than a problem to be avoided. "There are rules," Marcus continued. "Loyalty to the family comes first. We don't steal from honest people trying to make a living. We don't hurt innocents. And we don't abandon our own when things get tough. Break those rules, and you're out. But follow them, and you'll never be hungry or homeless again." The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. Maya knew she should be suspicious, should ask more questions, should probably walk away. But, as she sat there in the rain, feeling the first real food she had eaten in days settling in her stomach, she realized she had already made her decision. "The choice is yours," Marcus said, standing up and adjusting his jacket. "I'm not going to pressure you or give you some deadline. Take time to think about it. But, while you're thinking, remember that sometimes the most dangerous choice is the one that keeps you exactly where you are." He started to walk away, then turned back. "There's a diner on Morrison Street called Sal's. It's about 6 blocks from here, past the old church with the broken steeple. If you decide you want to hear more, go there tomorrow at noon. Ask for Marcus, and they'll know what to do." "Wait," Maya called out as he took another step. "Why me? Why did you stop?" Marcus paused, his expression becoming distant as if he were remembering something from long ago. "Because 15 years ago, I was sitting in an alley just like this one, convinced that I was going to die alone and forgotten. Someone gave me a chance, and it saved my life. Sometimes the circle comes around, and it's your turn to extend a hand." With that, he disappeared into the shadows between the buildings, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts and the lingering taste of the best sandwich she had ever eaten. She pulled the cardboard back around herself, but somehow the rain didn't seem as cold anymore. As the night wore on, Maya found herself thinking about Marcus's words. She thought about the life she had been living, scraping by day after day with no real hope for improvement. She thought about her grandmother, who had always told her that she was capable of great things if she just had the right opportunity. Most of all, she thought about the choice that lay before her. The Iron Wolves were clearly not just any gang. Marcus carried himself with the confidence of someone who commanded respect, but there had been genuine warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. The food he had given her was good quality, not something he had grabbed randomly. He had come prepared to help, which suggested this wasn't the first time he had reached out to someone in her situation. But Maya wasn't naive. She knew that joining any group like this would mean entering a world she didn't fully understand, with rules and dangers she couldn't anticipate. There would be expectations, obligations, and probably situations that would test her courage and moral flexibility. The question was whether the security and belonging Marcus offered was worth the unknown risks. As dawn began to break through the clouds, Maya realized that the rain had finally stopped. She emerged from her cardboard shelter and looked around at the alley that had been her home for the past week. The garbage, the broken bottles, the graffiti on the walls, all of it looked different somehow in the pale morning light. It looked temporary, like a place she was passing through rather than a place where she belonged. For the first time in months, Maya allowed herself to think about the future beyond just surviving the next day. She imagined what it would be like to have a real bed, regular meals, and people who cared whether she was safe. She imagined having purpose again, contributing to something larger than herself. The walk to Morrison Street would take her about an hour if she paced herself carefully. She had most of the morning to decide whether she was brave enough to take Marcus's offer seriously. As she gathered her few possessions into the plastic bag that contained everything she owned in the world, Maya realized that she had already made up her mind. She was tired of being invisible, tired of being afraid, and tired of feeling worthless. Whatever the Iron Wolves were, whatever they expected from her, it had to be better than slowly dying in an alley behind an abandoned bakery. Marcus had seen something in her worth saving, and maybe it was time she started seeing it too. The clock above Sal's diner showed exactly 12 noon when Maya pushed open the heavy glass door, the familiar smell of bacon and coffee hitting her like a warm embrace. The diner was busy with the lunch crowd, filled with construction workers, office employees on break, and elderly couples sharing quiet conversations over soup and sandwiches. Maya felt incredibly out of place in her dirty clothes and with her unwashed hair, but she forced herself to approach the counter where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes was wiping down glasses. "Excuse me," Maya said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the din of conversation and clinking plates. "I'm looking for Marcus." The woman's expression changed immediately, becoming both more alert and somehow more welcoming. She studied Maya for a moment, taking in her obvious poverty and the nervous way she clutched the plastic bag containing her possessions. "You must be Maya," the woman said with a knowing smile. "He said you might be coming by. I'm Rosa, and this is my place. Go grab a seat in booth 7, the one by the window in the back corner. I'll bring you something to eat while you wait." "I don't have any money," Maya said quickly, embarrassed by having to admit it but not wanting to create problems. Rosa waved her hand dismissively. "Marcus's friends eat free here, honey. Always have, always will. That man has done more for this neighborhood than you know. Now go sit down before you fall over." The booth Rosa had indicated was tucked away from the main dining area, offering privacy while still allowing a view of the entire restaurant. Maya slid onto the cracked vinyl seat and tried to process what was happening. The way Rosa had spoken about Marcus suggested he was well known and respected here, at least by some people. This wasn't the reaction she would have expected if the Iron Wolves were the kind of gang that terrorized local businesses. Rosa appeared a few minutes later with a plate piled high with meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread, along with a large glass of milk and a cup of coffee. Maya's eyes widened at the generous portions. I can't eat all this, she protested, even as her stomach growled loudly enough to be heard across the table. You'd be surprised what your body needs when it's been running on empty for so long, Rosa said, setting down napkins and utensils. Take your time, eat slow, and don't worry about finishing it all. Marcus shouldn't be too much longer. As Maya began to eat, savoring each bite of the first hot meal she had had in weeks, she became aware that other people in the diner were glancing her way. Not with the disgust or pity she had grown accustomed to on the streets, but with something that looked almost like recognition. A few customers nodded at her respectfully, and an older man at the counter raised his coffee cup in a small salute. She was halfway through the meal when Marcus appeared, sliding into the booth across from her without ceremony. In the daylight of the diner, he looked less intimidating but somehow more impressive. His clothes were clean and well-fitted, his hair was neatly trimmed, and there was an air of quiet authority about him that made other patrons nod deferentially as he passed their tables. You came, he said simply, and Maya detected a note of approval in his voice. I didn't have anywhere else to go, Maya replied honestly, then immediately regretted how pathetic that sounded. Marcus shook his head. That's not why you came. You could have found another alley, another dumpster, another doorway. You came because you're tired of just surviving and you want to start living again. Rosa appeared with a cup of coffee for Marcus and refilled Maya's glass without being asked. The two exchanged a look that spoke of long familiarity and mutual respect. Rosa's been feeding my people for 7 years, Marcus explained after she left. Her husband was killed in a drive-by shooting when some drug dealers thought this block belonged to them. The police wrote it off as gang violence and moved on. We made sure those dealers understood that this neighborhood was under our protection. Maya paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. What did you do to them? Nothing permanent, Marcus said with a slight smile that didn't entirely reach his eyes. But they decided to conduct their business elsewhere, and Rosa hasn't had any trouble since. Sometimes violence can only be answered with the promise of greater violence. The casual way he spoke about it should have frightened Maya, but instead she found herself thinking about all the times she had been threatened or harassed on the streets with no one to turn to for help. The idea of belonging to a group that would protect her was more appealing than she wanted to admit. Tell me about the Iron Wolves, she said, pushing her plate aside and leaning forward. Really tell me, not just the recruitment speech. Marcus appreciated her directness. We're not heroes, Maya. Don't romanticize what we do. We operate in the spaces where the law doesn't reach or doesn't care to reach. Sometimes that means we have to make difficult choices that other people would judge harshly. He paused to take a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. But we have our own code, our own sense of justice. We protect people who can't protect themselves. We provide for people who've been abandoned by the system. And we create opportunities for people who've never had any. How many people are in the group? 43 active members, plus about 20 people who work for our legitimate businesses but aren't part of the inner circle. We have a compound on the outskirts of the city where most of us live, but some members have their own places if they prefer privacy. Maya tried to imagine what a compound full of gang members would be like. Her mental picture was probably influenced too much by movies and television, but she couldn't help thinking of armed guards, razor wire, and constant tension. As if reading her thoughts, Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through several photos. These were taken last weekend at our monthly barbecue, he said, turning the screen so she could see. The pictures showed a large group of people gathered around picnic tables in what looked like a park setting. There were men and women of various ages, children running around with balloons, and an older man in an apron standing proudly next to an enormous grill. Everyone looked relaxed and happy, like any extended family gathering for a celebration. That's Tommy on the grill, Marcus said, pointing to the older man. He was a chef at a 5-star restaurant until he got caught skimming money to pay for his daughter's cancer treatments. Lost his job, his reputation, and nearly lost his daughter. We helped him out when he had nowhere else to turn. Now he runs our restaurant and makes the best barbecue in 3 counties. He swiped to another photo showing a young woman about Maya's age working under the hood of a motorcycle, her hands covered in grease but her face bright with concentration and satisfaction. That's Kelly. She was living in her car when her parents kicked her out for being gay. She had a natural talent for mechanics, so we put her to work in our garage. Now she's our head mechanic and makes more money than most college graduates. The stories continued as Marcus showed her more photos. A former addict who now managed their security business. A veteran with PTSD who found purpose training new members in self-defense. A teenage mother who had learned bookkeeping and now handled the finances for all their operations. We're not just a gang, Maya. We're a family that happens to operate outside conventional society's rules. Every person in these pictures came to us broken or desperate or forgotten. We gave them purpose, skills, and belonging. In return, they gave us their loyalty and their talents. Maya studied the photos carefully, looking for signs that this was all an elaborate facade. But the happiness in people's faces looked genuine, and there was something in the way they stood near each other that spoke of real affection and trust. What would my role be? She asked. That depends on what you're good at and what interests you. You mentioned you worked at a corner store, so you have some customer service experience. You're clearly intelligent and articulate. Rosa tells me you were polite and respectful when you came in, which shows you have good instincts about how to treat people. Marcus leaned back in the booth, studying her with the same intensity he had shown the night before. But, more than specific skills, I see someone with resilience. You've been living on the streets for months, and you haven't turned to drugs or prostitution or petty crime to survive. That shows character, and character is more valuable than any particular ability. What if I'm not cut out for this life? What if I try it and decide I want to leave? Then, you leave, Marcus said simply. We're not a prison, Maya. People have left the Iron Wolves before, and, as long as they don't betray our secrets or actively work against us, they leave with our blessing and some money to help them get started elsewhere. The straightforward answer surprised her. Maya had expected conditions, ultimatums, or threats about what would happen if she tried to leave. The fact that Marcus was being so honest about the option to walk away actually made her more inclined to trust him. There's something else you need to understand, Marcus continued, his voice becoming more serious. Being part of the Iron Wolves means accepting that we sometimes operate outside the law. We don't involve ourselves in anything truly harmful, but we're not Boy Scouts either. Sometimes we need to intimidate people who are threatening our family. Sometimes we need to acquire information or resources through unconventional means. And sometimes we need to send messages that can only be delivered through force. Maya felt a chill run through her as the reality of what he was offering became clearer. This wasn't just about having a place to live and regular meals. This was about joining a criminal organization, regardless of how benevolent Marcus made it sound. I've never been involved in anything illegal, she said quietly. Neither had anyone else in those photos when they first joined us, Marcus replied. We don't throw new members into dangerous situations. Everyone starts with legitimate work in our businesses, learning our values and proving themselves trustworthy. Some people never move beyond that level, and that's fine. Others gradually take on more responsibilities as they show they can handle them. He finished his coffee and signaled to Rosa for a refill. I'm not going to lie to you, Maya. There are risks involved in this life. There are other gangs that would like to see us disappear. There are corrupt police officers who resent our influence in certain neighborhoods. And there are always politicians and business leaders who don't appreciate having their activities monitored by people they can't control. Monitored? Marcus smiled grimly. One of our most important functions is keeping track of who's really running things in this city. We know which city council members are taking bribes, which police commanders are protecting drug operations, and which businesses are exploiting their workers. Sometimes we use that information to help innocent people who are being victimized by the system. The scope of what Marcus was describing was far beyond anything Maya had imagined. This wasn't just a gang that controlled a few blocks of territory. This was an organization with influence throughout the city, operating as a shadow government for people who had been failed by the legitimate authorities. It's a lot to think about, Maya admitted. It is, Marcus agreed. And I don't expect you to decide right now. But I do want you to see what you'd be joining before you make your choice. He stood up from the booth and gestured toward the door. My truck is outside. If you're willing, I'd like to show you our compound, introduce you to some of our people, and let you see for yourself what the Iron Wolves are really about. Maya looked down at her empty plate, then around the diner where people continued to treat her with a respect she hadn't experienced in months. Whatever the Iron Wolves were, they had clearly earned the loyalty of people like Rosa and the customers who had nodded to her earlier. That had to count for something. What happens if I go with you and decide I don't want to join? She asked. Then, I drive you back to wherever you want to go, no questions asked and no hard feelings, Marcus said. But, Maya, right now you're making decisions based on fear and desperation. Wouldn't you rather make a choice based on hope and possibility? She thought about the cardboard shelter behind the bakery, the constant hunger, the fear that came with being alone and vulnerable on the streets. Then, she thought about the photos Marcus had shown her, the obvious care and respect the people in them had for each other. Standing up from the booth, Maya shouldered her plastic bag and looked Marcus in the eye. Show me, she said. As they left the diner, Rosa called out from behind the counter. You take care of that girl, Marcus. She's got good bones. Outside, Marcus's truck turned out to be a spotlessly clean black pickup with tinted windows and custom rims that probably cost more than Maya had ever made in a year. He opened the passenger door for her, and she was surprised by the gesture of old-fashioned courtesy. As they drove through the city toward the outskirts, Maya watched familiar neighborhoods pass by the window. She had walked most of these streets at one time or another, looking for work, food, or just a safe place to rest. Now she was seeing them from the comfort of a warm vehicle, heading toward a future she couldn't have imagined just 24 hours earlier. Are you nervous? Marcus asked as they turned onto a highway that led out of the urban core. Yes, Maya admitted. But I've been nervous for months. At least now I'm nervous about something that might actually improve my life instead of just trying to survive another day. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's the right attitude. Fear isn't the enemy, Maya. Hopelessness is. Fear keeps you alert and makes you think carefully about your choices. Hopelessness just makes you give up. As they drove further from the city, Maya found herself wondering what kind of compound the Iron Wolves maintained and whether she would have the courage to accept Marcus's offer when the time came to make a final decision. The Iron Wolves compound was nothing like what Maya had expected. Instead of the fortress-like structure she had imagined, she found herself looking at what appeared to be a converted farm property spread across several acres of rolling hills. The main building was a large, rustic lodge surrounded by smaller cabins, workshops, and gardens. A few motorcycles and trucks were parked in a gravel lot, but the overall atmosphere was more reminiscent of a summer camp than a criminal headquarters. As Marcus parked the truck, Maya could see people going about various activities around the property. A group of children was playing on a swing set near one of the cabins, their laughter carrying across the open space. Two men were working on a motorcycle engine in an open garage, their conversation punctuated by the clink of tools on metal. A woman was hanging laundry on a line strung between two trees, humming softly to herself as she worked. This is home, Marcus said simply, getting out of the truck and walking around to open Maya's door. As they approached the main lodge, a massive German shepherd came bounding across the yard, tail wagging enthusiastically. Maya tensed, but the dog simply planted himself in front of Marcus and waited patiently for attention. This is Tank, Marcus said, scratching behind the dog's ears. He's our unofficial welcoming committee. Tank, meet Maya. The dog turned his attention to Maya, sniffing her hand cautiously before deciding she was acceptable and offering his head for petting. The simple interaction somehow made the entire place feel more normal, more like a home than a hideout. The interior of the lodge was warm and inviting, with comfortable furniture arranged around a large stone fireplace. The walls were decorated with photographs, artwork, and what appeared to be certificates and awards from various community organizations. A banner hanging near the entrance read Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, Family First, Always. Marcus. A woman's voice called from the kitchen area. You're just in time for lunch. And you brought a guest. The woman who emerged was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and flour dusting her apron. Her smile was genuine and motherly as she extended a hand to Maya. "I'm Sarah, a house mother around here. You must be Maya. Marcus told me he might be bringing someone by today." Maya shook Sarah's hand, surprised by the warmth of her greeting. "Nice to meet you. I hope I'm not imposing." "Nonsense," Sarah said, waving away her concerns. "There's always room for one more at our table. Come on, let's get you fed properly while Marcus gives you the tour." The dining area was a large room with several tables that could accommodate the compound's population. About 20 people were already seated for lunch, ranging in age from teenagers to senior citizens. As Maya entered with Marcus and Sarah, conversations paused briefly as people looked up to see who had arrived. "Everyone, this is Maya," Marcus announced. "She's considering joining our family, so I want you all to make her feel welcome and answer any questions she might have." The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. People called out greetings, waved from their seats, and several gestured for Maya to join them at their tables. The atmosphere was so normal and friendly that Maya had to remind herself she was visiting a gang compound. Marcus led her to a table where 3 people were already seated: a young woman about Maya's age with short purple hair and multiple piercings, a middle-aged man with intricate tattoos covering his arms, and an older woman who looked like she could have been someone's grandmother. "Maya, meet some of our family," Marcus said as they sat down. "This is Jazz, our computer specialist. Eddie, who runs our garage operations. And Margaret, who handles our community outreach programs." "Community outreach?" Maya asked, accepting a plate of what appeared to be homemade chicken and dumplings from Sarah. Margaret smiled. "We sponsor a little league team, organize neighborhood cleanup days, and run a food bank for families in need. Just because we operate outside the system doesn't mean we don't care about our community." Jazz leaned forward with obvious enthusiasm. "What kind of background do you have, Maya? Any experience with computers or technology?" "Not really," Maya admitted. "I mostly worked retail before I ended up on the streets." "Retail's perfect," Eddie interjected. "That means you know how to deal with difficult customers and work under pressure. Those are valuable skills here." As they ate, Maya found herself drawn into easy conversation with her tablemates. Jazz told her about the various computer systems she maintained for the group's legitimate businesses. Eddie described the custom motorcycle builds that had earned them recognition in several regional bike shows. Margaret explained how their community programs had helped reduce crime in 3 different neighborhoods by giving at-risk youth alternatives to gang membership. "Wait," Maya said, pausing with her fork halfway to her mouth. "You have programs to keep kids out of gangs? But, aren't you a gang ourselves?" Marcus finished with an amused expression. "Not exactly. We're more like an extended family that happens to protect its interests through unconventional means. There's a difference between what we do and what the drug dealers and street gangs do." Eddie nodded seriously. "The kids we work with in our programs know exactly who we are and what we represent. We're honest with them about the choices they'll face and the consequences of different paths. Some of them will probably end up working for us eventually, but only after they've finished school and prove they can handle responsibility." After lunch, Marcus took Maya on a tour of the compound. They visited the workshops where members created everything from custom leather goods to small electronic devices. They saw the garage where Eddie and his team worked on both legitimate auto repairs and special projects for the group. They walked through gardens where vegetables and herbs were grown to supplement the compound's food supply. One of the most impressive facilities was Jazz's computer center, a room filled with high-end equipment that looked like it belonged in a tech company rather than a gang headquarters. "We monitor police communications, track news that might affect our operations, and maintain secure communications with our people in the city," Jazz explained as she showed Maya banks of servers and multiple computer screens. "We also help our legitimate businesses with their online presence and digital security." "Is any of this illegal?" Maya asked. "Monitoring public radio frequencies is completely legal," Jazz replied with a grin. And everything else we do is just good business practice. The fact that we're very good at it isn't against the law. The tour continued to the residential areas, where Maya saw that members had options ranging from shared housing in the main lodge to private cabins for those who preferred more independence. The living spaces were clean, comfortable, and personalized by their occupants. Everyone contributes according to their abilities and receives according to their needs, Marcus explained as they walked between cabins. Nobody goes hungry, nobody sleeps outside, and nobody gets left behind when they're in trouble. They ended the tour at a small cemetery tucked into a grove of trees at the edge of the property. About a dozen headstones marked the graves of former members who had died over the years. We take care of our own, even after they're gone, Marcus said quietly. These people died knowing they mattered to someone, that their lives had meaning and purpose. That's more than a lot of people in this world can say. Maya read some of the inscriptions on the headstones. Most included not just names and dates, but brief descriptions of the person's contributions to the group: Tommy Martinez, master mechanic and beloved friend; Lisa Chen, devoted mother and fierce protector; Robert Jackson, wise counselor and patient teacher. What happened to them? Maya asked. Some died of natural causes or accidents, Marcus replied. A few were killed defending other members or protecting innocent people. One died in a car accident while delivering emergency medical supplies during a hurricane. They all lived and died as part of something larger than themselves. As they walked back toward the main lodge, Maya tried to process everything she had seen and heard. The Iron Wolves were clearly not a typical criminal organization. They operated more like a commune or intentional community, albeit one that was willing to use violence when necessary to protect its interests and values. I have to ask, Maya said as they reached the lodge's front porch. How do you fund all of this? The property, the equipment, the food for 40+ people? Marcus sat down on a wooden bench and gestured for Maya to join him. Our legitimate businesses generate most of our income. The garage makes excellent money because Eddie's reputation for quality work brings in customers from all over the region. Our restaurant is popular with both tourists and locals. And our security company has contracts with several businesses in the city. And the illegitimate income? We occasionally redistribute wealth from people who have acquired it through exploitation or corruption, Marcus said carefully. If a contractor is cheating elderly people out of their life savings, we might help recover some of that money for the victims. If a landlord is illegally evicting tenants, we might persuade him to change his business practices. Maya understood that Marcus was being diplomatic in his description, but she could read between the lines. The Iron Wolves were essentially modern-day Robin Hoods, using intimidation and theft to take from corrupt rich people and redistribute resources to those in need. Are you ever afraid of getting caught? She asked. Every day, Marcus admitted. But I'm more afraid of what happens to people like you if no one stands up for them. The system failed you, Maya. You worked, you paid taxes, you took care of your sick grandmother, and, when you needed help, there was nobody there. We're here for people like you. As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah appeared on the porch with a tray containing 3 glasses of iced tea. Thought you two might be thirsty after all that walking around, she said, settling into a chair across from them. Sarah was one of our first members, Marcus explained as they sipped their tea. She joined us 8 years ago after her husband was killed by a drunk driver who got off with a slap on the wrist because his father was a judge. Sarah's expression became sad but determined. I was so angry, so lost. I wanted justice, but the system told me to accept that sometimes bad things happen to good people. Marcus and the Iron Wolves helped me get the justice the courts wouldn't provide. What did you do? Maya asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. We made sure the drunk driver understood the real consequences of his actions, Sarah said simply. He didn't die, but he learned what it felt like to lose everything that mattered to him. And his father learned that his position couldn't protect him from people who operated outside his influence. The casual way Sarah spoke about what was clearly an act of revenge should have terrified Maya, but instead she found herself thinking about all the injustices she had witnessed in her own life. The landlord who had thrown her onto the street despite knowing she had nowhere to go. the boss who had fired her for being homeless, the social workers who had offered her nothing but forms to fill out and waiting lists to join. "I know what you're thinking," Marcus said, studying her expression. "You're wondering whether we're heroes or villains. The truth is, we're neither. We're just people who refuse to accept that the world has to be unfair and cruel. Sometimes that means we have to do things that other people would consider wrong." As the afternoon wore on, Maya met more members of the Iron Wolves and heard more of their stories. A veteran who had been denied proper medical care until the group intervened with his congressman. A single mother who had been cheated by a crooked mechanic until Eddie and his crew convinced the man to refund her money and fix her car properly. An elderly man who had been targeted by scam artists until the Iron Wolves tracked down the criminals and recovered his stolen savings. Each story followed the same pattern: someone vulnerable had been victimized by people with power, the system had failed to provide justice or protection, and the Iron Wolves had stepped in to balance the scales. They were vigilantes, but vigilantes with a clear moral code and a genuine desire to help rather than harm. As evening approached, Marcus gathered Maya and several other members around the fireplace in the main lodge. The atmosphere was relaxed and familial, with people sharing stories, playing card games, and simply enjoying each other's company. "What questions do you still have?" Marcus asked Maya. "I want you to understand exactly what you'd be joining if you decide to stay with us." Maya had been thinking about this moment all day, trying to formulate the concerns and fears that had been building in her mind. "What happens if I'm not strong enough for this life? What if I can't handle the violence or the illegal activities?" "Then, you work in our legitimate businesses and let other people handle the darker aspects of what we do," Marcus replied. "Not everyone is cut out to be an enforcer, Maya. We need people who can run our restaurant, manage our books, maintain our equipment, and care for our families. Every role is important." "What about law enforcement? Aren't you worried about undercover cops or informants?" "We're very careful about who we trust with sensitive information," Marcus said. "New members start with legitimate work and gradually earn access to more confidential operations. It typically takes years before someone is fully integrated into our inner circle." Jazz spoke up from her position near the fire. "We also have excellent intelligence about law enforcement activities. It's amazing what you can learn when you pay attention to public records, news reports, and social media. Plus, we have friends in various agencies who keep us informed about investigations that might affect us." "What about my future?" Maya asked. "If I join you, am I stuck here forever? Can I ever have a normal life?" Sarah laughed warmly. "Honey, what's normal? Is it normal to work 40 hours a week for a boss who doesn't care about you, live paycheck to paycheck, and hope you don't get sick because you can't afford healthcare? Is it normal to be one layoff away from homelessness?" Margaret nodded in agreement. "Several of our former members have gone on to start their own businesses, join the military, or pursue college educations. We support each other's dreams, even when those dreams lead people away from the compound. The key thing to understand," Marcus said, "is that joining the Iron Wolves means joining a family. Families support each other through good times and bad. They protect each other from threats. And they help each other achieve their goals, whatever those might be." As the evening grew later, Maya found herself feeling more and more comfortable with the people around her. They treated her with respect and affection, included her in their conversations, and seemed genuinely interested in her well-being. It was the kind of belonging she hadn't felt since her grandmother's death. "I need to make a decision, don't I?" she said finally. "Only when you're ready," Marcus replied. "But, yes, eventually you'll need to decide whether you want to stay and become part of our family, or whether you'd prefer to try a different path." Maya looked around at the faces in the firelight, seeing hope, determination, and genuine care in their expressions. These people had found a way to create meaning and purpose in a world that had discarded them. They had built something valuable together, something worth protecting and preserving. For the first time in months, Maya felt like she had a choice that might actually lead to happiness rather than just survival. The question was whether she had the courage to take it. Maya woke up the next morning in the most comfortable bed she had slept in for over 6 months. Sarah had insisted she spend the night in one of the guest rooms in the main lodge, complete with clean sheets, warm blankets, and a private bathroom with unlimited hot water. The simple luxury of taking a shower without worrying about time limits or safety had been almost overwhelming. As she dressed in the clean clothes Sarah had provided, Maya realized that she had already made her decision. The question was whether she had the courage to voice it and commit to the consequences. Through her window, she could see members of the Iron Wolves beginning their daily routines, Eddie opening the garage, Jazz heading to her computer center with a steaming mug of coffee, and Margaret organizing supplies for what looked like a community service project. The dining room was bustling with breakfast activity when Maya arrived. Sarah waved her over to a table where Marcus was already seated with Tommy, the former chef she had seen in the photographs, and a woman named Elena who managed the group's restaurant operations. "Sleep well?" Marcus asked as Maya accepted a plate of scrambled eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits from one of the kitchen volunteers. "Better than I have in months," Maya admitted. "Thank you for letting me stay." "Our pleasure," Sarah said from behind her, refilling coffee cups around the table. "You're welcome here as long as you need, whether that's one night or the rest of your life." As they ate, Tommy and Elena described their plans for expanding the restaurant's catering services. They had been approached by several local businesses about providing meals for corporate events, which would significantly increase their legitimate income while also giving them access to influential people in the community. "Information is often more valuable than money," Marcus explained when Maya asked about the strategic importance of the catering contracts. "When you're serving food at executive meetings, you learn things about business deals, political appointments, and financial arrangements that can be very useful." "For blackmail?" Maya asked hesitantly. "For protection," Elena corrected. "When we know who's planning what, we can make sure our interests and the interests of the people we protect are considered in those plans." After breakfast, Marcus suggested that Maya spend the day working alongside different members to get a better sense of where her skills might be most useful. They started in the restaurant kitchen, where Tommy immediately put her to work chopping vegetables for the lunch prep. "Cooking is like life," Tommy said as he demonstrated proper knife techniques. "You need good ingredients, careful preparation, and the right timing. Rush any part of the process, and the whole thing falls apart." Maya found the rhythm of kitchen work surprisingly soothing. There was something meditative about the repetitive motions of chopping, stirring, and seasoning, and she appreciated Tommy's patient instruction and gentle corrections. When the lunch rush began, she helped serve customers and was amazed to see how many community members came to the restaurant not just for food but for conversation and connection. "This place is like the heart of the neighborhood," Maya observed as she watched Tommy chat with an elderly regular about his grandchildren's school performance. "That's exactly what it is," Tommy replied. "Food brings people together, makes them feel cared for. When people know they have a place where they're welcome and valued, they're more likely to look out for each other." In the afternoon, Maya worked with Jazz in the computer center, learning about the various systems the Iron Wolves used to stay informed and connected. Jazz showed her how they monitored news feeds, social media, and public records to identify threats and opportunities. "Information warfare is the future," Jazz explained as she demonstrated a program that aggregated data from dozens of sources. "The people with the best information make the best decisions. We make sure our family has every advantage we can give them." Maya was surprised to discover that she had a natural aptitude for the research and analysis work. Her experience in retail had taught her to pay attention to details and patterns, skills that translated well to tracking information across multiple platforms. "You could be really good at this," Jazz said as Maya successfully identified connections between several seemingly unrelated news stories. "Want to try something a little more advanced?" For the next hour, Jazz taught Maya how to use various online tools to research individuals and organizations. They practiced by investigating a local politician who had recently been accused of taking bribes from developers. Within an hour, Maya had uncovered a web of financial connections that strongly supported the accusations. "This is incredible," Maya said, staring at the evidence displayed across multiple computer screens. "It's like solving a puzzle. A puzzle that helps us protect innocent people from corrupt politicians," Jazz added. Information like this gets shared with journalists, prosecutors, and community activists who can use it to demand accountability. As the day progressed, Maya also spent time with Eddie in the garage, where she learned basic motorcycle maintenance, and with Margaret, who was organizing donations for a back-to-school supply drive. Each experience reinforced her sense that the Iron Wolves were genuinely committed to helping their community, even as they operated outside conventional legal boundaries. That evening, Marcus invited Maya to join him for a private conversation on the lodge's back porch. The sun was setting over the rolling hills, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and the peaceful setting made it easy to forget the complex realities of the life she was considering. "How do you feel about everything you've seen and learned?" Marcus asked as they settled into comfortable chairs. "Overwhelmed," Maya admitted. "But also hopeful. I never imagined there were people who lived this way, who had found a way to create something meaningful together." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "It wasn't easy to build what we have here. There were times when we almost lost everything to rival gangs, police investigations, or internal conflicts. But we survived because we stayed true to our principles and never forgot why we came together in the first place." "What were you like before you started the Iron Wolves?" Maya asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about Marcus's personal history. For a long moment, Marcus stared out at the darkening landscape, his expression distant and sad. "I was angry," he said finally. "Angry at the world, angry at the system that had failed me, angry at myself for not being strong enough to fight back. I spent 3 years living on the streets after aging out of foster care, convinced that I was worthless and that nobody cared whether I lived or died." He turned to look at Maya directly. "I was sitting in an alley very much like the one where I found you when a man named Vincent Rodriguez walked up to me. Vincent was the founder of the Iron Wolves, though back then, we were just called the Wolves and we only had about 8 members. What happened to him?" "He died 5 years ago defending one of our members from a drug dealer who thought he could muscle in on our territory," Marcus said quietly. "Vincent was 63 years old, should have been thinking about retirement. Instead, he died in a hospital bed after taking 3 bullets meant for a 20-year-old kid who had nowhere else to turn." Maya felt tears prick her eyes as she imagined the loss the group must have experienced. "I'm sorry. Vincent taught me that strength isn't about being able to hurt people," Marcus continued. "Real strength is about being willing to stand between the people you love and the things that would harm them. He taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about choice and commitment and shared values." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the compound settling down for the night. Somewhere in the distance, Maya could hear children's laughter and the soft murmur of adults talking on other porches. "I want to join you," Maya said suddenly, the words emerging before she had consciously decided to speak them. Marcus smiled, but his expression remained serious. "Are you sure? Once you commit to this family, there's no going back to the way things were before. You'll know things that could get people killed if they fell into the wrong hands. You'll be part of operations that most people would consider criminal. And you'll be a target for anyone who sees the Iron Wolves as a threat." "I'm sure," Maya said, feeling a calm certainty settling over her. "I've spent months thinking about what I wanted my life to be, and this is it. These people, this purpose, this way of living that actually makes a difference in the world." Marcus stood up and extended his hand to her. "Then, welcome to the family, Maya. Welcome to the Iron Wolves." As they shook hands, Maya felt a surge of emotion that she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's death. She belonged somewhere again. She had people who would care about her well-being and support her dreams. She had found a purpose larger than just surviving from day to day. Over the following weeks, Maya threw herself into learning everything she could about the Iron Wolves and her role within the organization. She split her time between working in the restaurant, assisting Jazz with information gathering, and participating in community service projects with Margaret. Her first real test came about a month after she joined when Eddie brought a problem to the group's attention. A predatory lender was targeting elderly residents in a nearby neighborhood, tricking them into signing loan agreements with impossible terms and, then, threatening foreclosure when they couldn't pay. "We've identified 7 families who are about to lose their homes," Eddie reported during a weekly planning meeting. The contracts are legal but completely unethical. These people are being robbed by someone who's exploiting their trust and desperation.
Marcus turned to Maya. What do you think we should do about this?
Maya had been expecting this moment, the first time she would be asked to participate in planning something that would clearly be illegal. She thought about the elderly couple she had met while volunteering at Margaret's food bank, imagining them being victimized by someone who saw their vulnerability as an opportunity for profit. We need to make sure those families get to keep their homes, Maya said firmly. And we need to make sure this lender understands that there are consequences for preying on innocent people. The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Jazz used her computer skills to thoroughly investigate the lender's business practices, uncovering evidence of multiple violations of consumer protection laws. Maya and Margaret visited each of the affected families, explaining the legal problems with their contracts and offering free legal assistance through a non-profit organization that was friendly to the Iron Wolves. Meanwhile, Eddie and several other members paid a visit to the lender's office to discuss the situation in person. No violence was used, but the man was left with a clear understanding that his business practices had attracted unwanted attention from people who were capable of making his life very difficult. Within a week, all 7 families had received official notices that their loan agreements were being cancelled due to administrative errors in the original paperwork. The lender also made substantial donations to several local charities, apparently overcome by a sudden desire to give back to the community he had been exploiting.
How do you feel about what we did?
Marcus asked Maya after the situation was resolved.
Like we actually made a difference, Maya replied.
Those families get to keep their homes, and hopefully that lender will think twice before trying to cheat vulnerable people again.
And the fact that we operated outside the law to accomplish that? Maya considered the question seriously. The law wasn't protecting those families.
If anything, it was enabling their exploitation. Sometimes doing the right thing means ignoring rules that were written by people who don't care about justice.
As the months passed, Maya became more integrated into the Iron Wolves operations.
She developed expertise in financial analysis, helping to identify corruption and fraud that could be addressed through the group's unconventional methods. She also discovered a talent for talking to people, particularly other young women who had found themselves in desperate situations. Marcus began sending Maya on recruitment missions, asking her to reach out to homeless individuals who might benefit from the family's protection and support. She found these encounters deeply meaningful, remembering her own desperation and the life-changing moment when Marcus had offered her hope. One evening, nearly a year after joining the Iron Wolves, Maya was walking through the same neighborhood where Marcus had first found her. She was delivering supplies to a network of informants when she heard a familiar sound, someone crying softly in a nearby alley. Following the sound, Maya discovered a young man about her own age huddled behind a dumpster, clutching a backpack that appeared to contain all his worldly possessions. He looked up at her approach, and she saw in his eyes the same combination of desperation and defiance she remembered feeling during her own darkest days.
"Are you hungry?" Maya asked gently, pulling a sandwich from her bag.
The young man nodded reluctantly, accepting the food with shaking hands. As he ate, Maya sat down beside him and listened to his story. Recently discharged from the military with untreated PTSD, kicked out of his apartment for failing to pay rent after losing his job, abandoned by family members who didn't understand his struggles.
"What's your name?" Maya asked when he finished talking.
"David," he replied quietly. Maya smiled, remembering another conversation in another alley that had changed the course of her life.
"Well, David, I think I know someone who might be able to help you. Are you willing to trust a stranger who's been exactly where you are right now?"
As they walked together toward Marcus's truck, which was parked nearby, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as someone society had discarded, forgotten and left to die in an alley. Now she was part of something larger than herself, something that gave her life meaning and purpose.
The Iron Wolves weren't perfect.
They operated in moral gray areas that would make many people uncomfortable. But they had created a space where people like Maya and David could find belonging, support, and the opportunity to fight back against a world that had written them off. As Marcus emerged from the shadows to meet them, Maya saw him through David's eyes, a powerful figure offering hope to someone who had lost everything. She remembered her own fear and desperation from that night so many months ago, and how Marcus's simple offer of food and belonging had saved her life. "Marcus," she said as they approached the truck, "I'd like you to meet David.
I think he might be interested in hearing about the family."
Marcus studied the young veteran with the same careful attention Maya remembered from their first meeting. After a moment, he nodded and opened the truck's passenger door. "Well, David," Marcus said with a slight smile, "how would you feel about getting a hot meal and hearing about some people who might understand what you've been through?" As they drove back toward the compound, Maya realized that she had found more than just survival when she joined the Iron Wolves. She had found her purpose, being the person for others that Marcus had been for her, extending hope to those who had lost it, and proving that sometimes the most important families are the ones we choose rather than the ones we're born into. The circle was complete, and Maya understood that this was just the beginning of her real life.